So this Sunday, we are continuing our exploration of the 6 sources that make up the living tradition that Unitarian Universalism draws from for grounding and for inspiration. The first source was the direct experience of transcending wonder. The second source was words and deeds of prophetic people. The third source was wisdom from the world's religious traditions. The fourth source was Judeo-Christian teachings that call us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that brings us to our fifth source, which we are talking about today, which is, and I quote, humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and which warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. So read that again. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. So the first thing we want to do is understand what we mean by humanism. Humanism is sometimes equated, especially within Unitarian Universalism, with atheism or agnosticism, or what we would call secular humanism. But they are not the same thing. It is possible to be a religious or a theistic humanist. And indeed, Unitarianism has always had very strong humanist themes going right back to its very beginning when it was an explicitly Christian theistic religion. Humanism is a way of approaching life's big questions, and in our context of approaching religion, that is centered first and foremost on understanding the human experience and meeting human needs. So whatever one believes about an afterlife, humanism is less concerned with the next world and more concerned with the here and now. It values those things and ideas which help us to fully develop and express our human personality during this life. It values those things and ideas which serve to meet human needs, which bring pleasure, happiness, and goodness to human beings in the world. Humanism believes in the essential goodness of human beings, or at least our potential goodness. It is optimistic about human beings. And it's optimistic about the ability of humanity to solve its problems. And so it seeks to expand the sphere of peaceful human cooperation. The watchwords of humanism would be, we are all in this together, and we are responsible for our own destiny. And that last is key, because humanism fully embraces our human responsibility to care for one another and care for the earth. It is up to us. If a form of religious humanism holds the idea of a god or gods or like a spirit of universal love that is operating in the world, it will still emphasize that those universal forces must operate through the human mind and human agency, through free will and our conscious decision to be ethical and loving beings. We must be the hands and voice of love. We must be the embodiment of spirit. So Unitarian Universalism includes both secular and religious humanists. Now, secular humanism was incorporated into Unitarian Universalism, really into Unitarianism, at the turn of the last century by ministers like John Dietrich and Curtis Reese, and really in the Midwest. And they introduced this radical idea that one could have a religion that did not make any supernatural claims at all. A religion that was by humans and for humans, and had its faith firmly rooted in the human spirit, a religion that had space for atheists and agnostics. And this was, to put it mildly, a challenge to the Unitarianism of its day. This started some conversations. A religion without God seemed like a contradiction in terms to some Unitarians at the time, but has always been the case in our history. Over our 200-plus year history, whenever there has been an argument about including or excluding a certain group of people from the circle of Unitarianism, inclusion always wins out in the end. And so the humanists found a place within Unitarianism, and today I would say about 50% of UUs identify secular humanists of one type or another, and the ideas of humanism have been hugely influential on the development of Unitarian Universalism. Now, as a human-centered philosophy that seeks to improve life on earth for everyone, humanism tends to place a great deal of confidence in the power of the human mind to better our earthly situation, chiefly through the application of reason and science. So much so that humanism is sometimes identified with reason and science. And so our fifth source says, specifically, we draw on humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and the results of science, and warn us against idolatries of the mind and spirit. And that last part, idolatries of the mind and spirit, is a flowery way of saying, don't believe things just because you want to. Don't believe things just because it feels good or it makes your life easier, or not believing them would be hard and cause you to change. Don't fall in love with your own beliefs so much that you are unwilling to challenge them in the face of new evidence. And this is certainly foundational to the way that Unitarian Universalists engage with the world. We are a questioning lot, and we like to think we also ask those hard questions of ourselves. But this language also, in my mind, it frames our humanist tradition in a way that is a little bit negative, and our relationship to reason and science in a way that is a little bit negative. We are counseled to heed reason that warns against idolatries. And that sounds a little bit like you need to take your intellectual medicine, right? Like reason and science exist to rein us in case, like through our flights of fancy, we would fall into error or believe the wrong thing. But modern humanism has much more to say than to remind us that it is good to be rational, and science is a pretty good basis for public policy. Science is a pretty good basis for public policy, by the way. But modern humanism draws our attention to the scientific vision of the universe. And it says if we really explore the wonders contained therein, we will reach ever greater depths of awe and humility. Awe and humility. Modern humanism has a deep reverence at its core. It is not just reason, it is reason and reverence. So in that spirit, I want to tell you a story today, the almost greatest story ever told. But before we get to that story, we need to talk just for a moment about matter and light and the interplay between the two. So we're going to get a little science in here. Just a little, because I'm not a scientist. So matter, physical stuff, absorbs visible light. If it didn't, you could turn off the light switch in your bedroom and the room would stay lit up because the light would just be bouncing off the walls all over the place. And we know that's not what happens, right? The bouncing photons quickly get absorbed by everything around them, and so the room goes dark. We know that. Of course, not all light gets absorbed. Some of it gets reflected back. We know that too, right? So that matter absorbs and reflects light is just obvious to us by the evidence of our everyday common experience. But matter doesn't just absorb and reflect light, it also generates light of its own. Now, we sort of know this from common experience. If you turn on your stove, if you heat a piece of metal, a metal coil, you know that eventually as it gets hotter, it begins to glow from red to white hot. But what is considerably less obvious and what humans have never known until very, very recently in our history is that all physical bodies at any temperature above absolute zero are generating light. Everything around you is continuously pouring out light. You, me, the walls, the floor, this pulpit, the flowers. It's not often on the spectrum that we can see with our eyes, but it is there. In the words of the poet Gerard Manley Hopkins, the world is shining like shook foil, and it is, literally. If you like that idea, and I myself find this idea very beautiful, thank a science person, because it is scientists who figured out that it is true. And then they actually invented things like infrared cameras so that we could see it directly. They figured it out with their imagination, with reason, and with a lot of mathematics, and now we can see it directly. So at the turn of the last century, a physicist named Max Planck showed that if you had an object that was a perfect absorber of all the light you take in, remember, light reflects stuff off of it, but if you had an object that perfectly absorbed all the light that fell in it, called a black body, then the light pouring out of that black body, because it also generates light, would have a unique spectrum that depended only on its temperature. The temperature alone by itself would determine what that light looked like, its spectrum. Okay, so remember that idea, because it's going to be important to to the story we're about to tell, the almost greatest story ever told, which is the story of the birth of our universe. So this is my extremely inexpert, 100% layman's understanding of the current accepted scientific story of creation, with 99.99999% of the details omitted. Here's what a few hundred years of reason and science have to tell us about where we came. So about 13.77 billion years ago, give or take a few years, all of the matter and energy in the universe was compressed together into a wee dot of space-time. How is that for scientific? Wee dots. And for reasons that we do not know, about 13.77 billion years ago, that wee dot began to expand. This is the Big Bang. And it's important to understand, if such a thing is understandable, this stuff didn't like blow up out into empty space around it, like to fill that empty space. There was no empty space around it, there was just a wee dot. What happened is space-time itself begins to expand, and as it expands, it carries all of the matter and energy in it along with it for the ride. And so as the universe expands, everything is moving away from everything else, all in the same different directions at the same time. Think about like if you put dots on a balloon and you blow up the balloon. As the balloon expands, the dots on the balloon travel away from each other. It's like that. That's how the universe works. So all of the really exciting things happen in the first second of the history of the universe. Matter wins out over antimatter. The fundamental forces like gravity appear and they start going to work. Light is born. The basic particles, things like protons and electrons, they shake out of this cosmic soup. However, there are no atoms yet in the first second of the universe because it is way too hot and crowded for anything stable like an atom to form. So if an atom tried to form, it would immediately get ripped to pieces by all the particles bouncing around in this very hot and crowded universe. So there won't be atoms for another 379,000 years. In the meantime, for the next 379,000 years, the baby universe, as it expands and as it starts to cool, looks nothing like how we see space today, with these vast expanses of darkness and clusters of light. The baby universe is actually quite bright. It's lit up everywhere, and it's lit up with a uniform hazy glow. And that is because all of the protons and neutrons and electrons are so crowded together in this space that a particle of light, a photon, it can't go anywhere at all without bumping into something else. So the light is all just bouncing around. There's no space for the light to shoot off like a beam of light like we think of as light. Instead of light moving as beams through space, it is scattered in all directions throughout the universe, creating this kind of soft, glowing haze. So it's actually quite cozy, except for the incinerating temperatures. But finally, after 379,000 years of the universe expanding and cooling, things calmed down enough that the attractive forces that were born in the first second of the universe, that have been waiting all this time, they love to create stable, orderly atoms if only they could. Well, finally they can go to work. And so what happens is these individual hydrogen atoms start coalescing out of the soup of the universe like water droplets condensing out of mist. They just start coming together. And this allows for an event called the decoupling of light and matter. Because remember, before this, all the light of the universe is trapped in this cosmic mist. There's no space for the light to get going. But as the mist condenses into these hydrogen atoms, empty space opens up for the first time. And that means photons, particles of light, can now move, and they do. They can take off in any one direction on proper beams of light. I think about when my daughter Sam was 2, like if I let my attention wander for even a minute, she'd like take off like a shot in a straight direction away from me, you know, like running as fast as she could. That's how I think of the light, 379,000 years in the universe. It's like a toddler set free, so it can just go racing off and try out its legs in this strange new universe of space. I love everything about this image of creation. First the hazy glow, and then the hydrogen atoms coalescing like drops of dew, and finally light set free from its prison, racing off unimpeded through the universe. And after the decoupling, the universe begins to look like it does today. It's the beginning of darkness everlasting. Now, remember that idea from before about a black body, something that absorbs light perfectly, and therefore it generates a certain light, depends only on its temperature. Well, before matter and light decoupled, all the light in the universe was absorbed perfectly, locked up inside of all of that matter, which means that the universe itself was a perfect black body at the time that the light suddenly began pouring freely. And this means that if we could calculate the temperature of the universe at that moment when light first ran free 379,000 years after the moment of creation, we would know exactly what that new light of the universe would have looked like. It would have a unique spectrum that was all effective. And after correcting for some effects of an expanding universe, we would know what the very first light of the universe should look like today. And since it poured out in all directions at the moment of decoupling, we would expect it to still be falling on us today from every point in the universe. So in 1989, a special satellite called COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer, was launched into orbit. And its mission was to gather data on a cosmic phenomenon that had been puzzling radio astronomers since at least the 60s. And this was the so-called cosmic background radiation, which was this weird glow of radiation that just seemed to be coming from everywhere in an absolutely uniform way. They couldn't figure out what that was. So they sent COBE up, and after extensive measuring, it was determined that the spectrum of this mystery background radiation matched almost perfectly the predicted spectrum of the black body radiation of the universe, our decoupled light from 13 billion years ago. It is, in fact, one of the closest fits of experimental data to theoretical data that known to science. It is an almost perfect match. So the two principal investigators, George Smoot and John Matter, they won the Nobel Prize for this discovery, and they won it in 2006. 2006 we learned this. This is like yesterday. Right? Like, I think I still have Blockbuster video rentals I need to return from 2006. So we are privileged to live in a time of amazing leaps into our understanding of the grandeur of the universe, because the discovery of the black body cosmic radiation is one of the reasons that we now believe that the Big Bang is not just a nice idea or a good story, but it is actually the true story of the creation of our universe out of this wee dot of space-time, the almost greatest story ever told. And I say almost greatest story because after those hydrogen atoms coalesced out of the cosmic mist of the universe 13.4 billion years ago, after that great decoupling of light, those atoms still had a lot of work to do. First, they had to make stars, and inside those stars then synthesize all of the elements that we find in our universe. And then they had to scatter in dust clouds across the cosmos as those stars exploded. And then those far-wandering dust clouds are shaped by gravity into planets, and the planets cool. And some of that original star matter begins to organize into molecules, into organic compounds. And then in at least one place in the universe, some of these molecules, in a way that we don't really understand, but we can sort of guess at, they start to replicate themselves. They start to make copies of each other. And once that happens, once replication happens, the logic of evolution goes to work in a way that we actually understand very, very well. And those organic compounds are shaped into living things. Now, this is awesome. This is life springing into being from the whirling matter of stars. But it's not yet the greatest story ever told, because the greatest story ever told is the one that is going on right now, and it's the story of what happens when, in at least one place in the universe, although there may be others, and at least one time, although there may be other times, it's the story of what happens when the universe wakes up. When matter, the detritus of the Big Bang, the far-flung stuff of stars, becomes aware. It's the story of what happens when the light of consciousness enters the world and the universe becomes aware of itself. And that miracle is happening right now through us. The great Carl Sagan said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." And that is just so. We are children of stars contemplating the stars. We are the universe standing in awe at itself and wondering. And we are one story, there may be others, of the mysterious power of love unfolding within the realm of living beings. So as religious people, our response to this creation story must be one of awe and of reverence, and also one of responsibility, because we are participants in something that is ancient and majestic and mysterious. But more than just participants, as conscious beings, as beings with free will, as people who can choose the path of knowledge and love or the path of destruction, we have become co-creators of the story. We are co-creators of the greatest story ever told. So if we look on the world and our place in it with the eyes of science, we see our deep interconnectedness to the forces of life, and by extension, our deep connection to one another. We are all part of the same cosmic story of creation. We are all the universe unfolding, and we all share in that ancient dignity and mystery. So modern humanism, rooted in reason and reverence, promises us more than just intellectual consistency. It offers us great new depths of religious feeling, of wonder and imagination, and a new and richer appreciation of the miracle of life, of its precious fragility, of its sacredness. From that appreciation, may we find new ways of being together that reflect that sacredness. May we take seriously our responsibility to be sources of love and compassion to one another. And may we reflect on our humanist heritage that says, "Let me not wait for deliverance, but let me be deliverance. Let me not wait for liberation, let me be liberation. And if there is to be love in the world, let it be through me, right here and now." We are all wayfaring strangers. We are all longing for a better world, a Jordan where we can find our peace. And we are all the creation of that better world. It is up to us. If there is to be love in the world, let it be through us. And so in this sense, with joy and gratitude for our human powers and for the great promise of the human spirit, we close again today with the lines of the poet who wrote, "You know that sooner or later this had to happen, that somehow it would all break out, all that pent-up joy, and people would sing and hold hands, their bodies swerving like taxis, and the music inside their heads would fill the streets with dancing, clapping hands and stamping, and you sing another chorus of we, hey we, yes we." I said, we are all we've got. Blessed be and amen.